On the 10th of November 1975, the largest ship ever to sink on the Great Lakes slips beneath the waterline 15 nautical miles northwest of Whitefish Bay, Lake Superior, taking every one of its 29 crew with it. The investigation that follows leaves more questions than answers. One thing is certain, there is not one theory that everyone agrees on. And so you should read through the comments on this video to find more information and decide for yourself which is the most plausible explanation. In November 2023, I released a video on the Edmund Fitzgerald that I've since taken down. I focused on the official investigation, and you were quick to point out that there's a lot more to it. Thank you, I appreciate your input. I made some mistakes, and so I took it as a personal challenge to raise my game. It's impossible to be absolutely certain about the cause of this accident. But in this video, you'll learn what the possible contributing factors are, along with some of the strengths and weaknesses of those theories. I encourage you once again to share your perspective in the comments. This video is sponsored by MyHeritage, more on them later. Our story begins with Ernest McSorley, who was born in Canada. At 11 years old, he moved to the US with his father and stepmother. He spent his teenage years watching ships moving cargo up and down the St. Lawrence River from the Great Lakes to Montreal and Quebec. From a young age, he decided to join their ranks, and at 23, he started his career on the water. The Great Lakes are vast inland lakes. They're the largest freshwater system in the world, containing 80% of America's freshwater and 20% of the world's freshwater. Every year, 120 million tons of cargo are shipped across the Great Lakes. They're the arteries keeping heavy industry afloat, but these lakes are more dangerous than most would assume. They're home to an estimated 6,000 shipwrecks and the graves of nearly 30,000 sailors. At 729 feet long, the Edmund Fitzgerald is designed to be 1 foot less than the maximum limit on the Great Lakes. Construction begins on the 9th of August 1957 and differs from the usual manufacturing process of the time. Traditionally, construction begins by laying down a ship's keel and building the ship up from there. But the Edmund Fitzgerald's hull is built in bulkhead segments which are then joined together. This is one of the first times this style of assembly has ever been used and goes on to become the industry standard. On the 7th of June 1958, the Edmund Fitzgerald is launched. At the time of its launch, it's the largest ship on the Great Lakes. It weighs 13,632 tons and is able to carry well over 25,000 tons. It has a crew of 29 and is driven by massive steam turbine engines that push it along at 14 knots. It's named after the president and CEO of Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company, Edmund Fitzgerald, who fits the bill for the $8.4 million ship. At the christening ceremony, Elizabeth Fitzgerald, Edmund's wife, tries to break the champagne bottle across the side of the Fitzgerald. It takes her 3 tries. In recent years, the traditional champagne christening bottle has been thinned down to make it easier to break and avoid the embarrassment and superstition of a failed attempt. As if to reinforce any superstition, it then takes over half an hour to release the ropes, and the ship slides down into the water at a dangerous angle, sending a huge wave crashing to the bank on the opposite side of the shore, drenching people who are watching the launch. In the crowd of almost 15,000 spectators, a 58-year-old man is said to have a heart attack and die on the scene. Superstition points to this series of events as a sign of bad luck for the vessel. Nonetheless, the ship is fitted out and goes into service. The massive steam powerhouse on board makes it one of the fastest freighters at the time. Its pilot house has the most advanced navigational and charting equipment for its time, as well as top-of-the-line radio and communication equipment. The interior fittings are lavish for a cargo ship. 2 guest staterooms, a guest lounge, comfortable captain's office and quarters, laundry room, recreational deck, and the crew staterooms are larger than industry standards. They also have a kitchen with all the amenities to provide meals to the 2 dining rooms on board. one luxury dining room for officers and wining and dining the company's guests, and another for the crew. The ship's leased by the Ogilvy Norton Mineral Company for a 25-year contract. Thanks to MyHeritage for sponsoring this video. I've always been curious about my family tree. My late uncle researched my mom's side of the family. When I spoke to my brother, he said he's done some research on my dad's side of the family. So when I saw that I can get a DNA test, I was really curious to see the results. Simply take a swab from your cheek and post it off, then wait for the results. I found some old photos in MyHeritage from people in my family tree that I didn't even know exist. It's amazing to restore and bring them to life. Okay, my DNA results are in. Let's take a look. Right, so 78% English. That's hardly surprising. I would expect some English. 8.5% Eastern European. Okay, wouldn't have expected that. 7.5% or 7.6% Scandinavian. Middle Eastern and Finnish. Rather surprising. View full ethnicity estimate. Okay, so now we can start to see that there is some Irish background there. What I'm really interested to take a look at is my DNA matches. So first things first, my cousin is there. Okay, I didn't know that my cousin had taken a test. That's interesting. There are other people in there, but these are certainly people that I don't know. I mean, parents' first cousin, second cousin. One of the most surprising things for me was that other people in my family have already started building the family tree and taking DNA tests. And while there was only a small percentage of Irish in my DNA, I actually have an Irish passport from Irish ancestors. Does it make you wonder what surprises are waiting for you? If you want to learn more about your family, click the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen right now to start your 30-day free trial and use my code WaterlineStories for free shipping. On the 22nd of September 1958, the Edmund Fitzgerald makes its maiden voyage, leaving its birthplace in Rouge River, Detroit, Michigan, and sailing to Silver Bay, Minnesota to retrieve a load of taconite, iron ore. On its very first trip, it sets a Great Lakes tonnage record, the first of many records the ship will set. For well over 10 years, it remains the largest ship on the Great Lakes, carrying cargo loads previously thought to be impossible. Onlookers line up to watch the ship pass through locks and channels. It's nicknamed the Singing Ship because one of its captains, Peter Pulser, would play music on the megaphone to boost morale. He's also known to speak over the megaphone, sharing facts about the ship with onlookers as they pass through the docks. From new construction techniques to being the largest ship built, shaking off superstitions that plagued its launch, carrying bulk loads larger than any other ship, and a skipper with personality, Edmund Fitzgerald develops a reputation and legend that you could compare to SpaceX today. In 1971, 13 years after its maiden voyage, it's refitted from coal firing to oil firing, increasing its speed and endurance. In 1972, Ernest McSorley takes command of the Edmund Fitzgerald. McSorley's already had 9 ships under his command. While he's not at the helm of the Edmund Fitzgerald, he lives with his wife Nellie in Ottawa Hills, a leafy suburb of Ohio, just a stone's throw from Lake Erie, where he and Nellie raised Nellie's 3 children from a previous marriage. During the winter of 1973-74, the Fitzgerald comes out of the water for annual maintenance. Ex-Fitzgerald crew member George Bergner is at the shipyard one day when he overhears a conversation between a shipyard worker and an employee of the Ogilvy Mineral Company who owned the Fitzgerald. In a deposition later in life, Bergner says the conversation is about breaks in the welds that hold the keel in place and that the keel is loose. The Coast Guard know about the breaks in the welds and have approved minor repairs. Bergner also testifies about another conversation he heard between McSorley and crew members on the Fitzgerald. The crew members were digging mud out from the bottom of the Fitzgerald when they noticed the keel was loose again, and they told McSorley. McSorley's response, as Bergner puts it, was to say, "All the son of a bitch has to do is stay together for 1 more year. After that, I don't care what happens to it." McSorley is planning to retire after the season, and so the problem would transfer to the new captain. I'm going to call this the first theory of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. A cargo ship that's poorly maintained is an accident waiting to happen. If the keel was loose and there were structural problems, then it's possible a severe storm could exacerbate those weak points, causing the Fitzgerald to break apart and sink. The Fitzgerald's sister ship, the Arthur Homer, will later be laid up permanently in 1980 for a structural deficiency, possibly pointing to a similar problem. But now it's 1975 and the Edmund Fitzgerald is in its prime, still in its initial 25-year contract and not even a third of the way through its expected service life. On the 9th of November 1975 at 08:30, Edmund Fitzgerald is moored at the Burlington Northern Railroad dock. It begins loading over 26,000 tons of taconite for a trip from Superior, Wisconsin, across Lake Superior and south to Zug Island on the Detroit River. The process of loading is lengthy, as it always is. Towards the end of the season, the Fitz is trying to deliver as much cargo as it can before the winter weather closes in. The loading foreman and deck boss work in tandem to ensure the proper distribution of ore throughout the massive ship's hull. Too much on one side or the other would risk capsizing the ship. Too much along the center line and it could drag its belly out of the port or worse, break its back. Something that's destroyed several ships before it. This could be referred to as the second theory of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. If the ship is pushing the limits of its cargo capacity, that reduces its freeboard. Freeboard is the volume of spare capacity. A ship always needs some freeboard or it would sink. All ships have a specific freeboard they shouldn't go over. If the Fitzgerald is overloaded, then that reduces its freeboard, and under normal weather conditions, it might not matter. The National Weather Service has been tracking a large November storm, but predicts it will pass south of Lake Superior. By 14:15, 6 hours later, the crew hauls in the shorelines and Edmund Fitzgerald departs Lake Superior en route to Detroit with 26,116 tons of taconite pellets. After loading, the crew on the Fitzgerald fasten the hatch covers on deck, sealing the cargo holds. Some hatch covers have seen better days, but overall, they're in good working order. As they pass out the breakwater, Janice Armagust and her 2 children stand on the shore. The children are hoping to catch a glimpse of their dad, Michael Armagust, the 3rd mate. He's not on deck. Janice yells to a deckhand asking where Mike is, and he responds that Mike's below deck. Janice and the children wave goodbye to the ship and watch as it sails out onto Lake Superior. The deckhand continues to go around and fasten deck hatches as needed for the calm weather of the day. Deck hatches is the 3rd theory for the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. As with all the theories of why the Edmund Fitzgerald sank, the deck hatch theory is heavily debated. In many photographs of the Edmund Fitzgerald, not all the hatch dogs are secure. This has led some to believe that it's common practice not to secure all the dogs while underway. On the one hand, not all photographs are taken when the ship is sailing, and so how would we know if it's common practice to leave them undogged when the ship is underway? On the other hand, captains of other ships have used the same types of hatch covers and dogs without them failing because the weight of the hatch cover itself is actually enough to seal the hatch, even if a few hatch dogs aren't secure. It's also possibly in the interest of the ship's owners to shift the blame to the crew members in order to secure the insurance payout. There are 2 main questions. Were all the hatch dogs secure? And if they weren't secure, would that have allowed enough water into the hull to sink the ship? On board the Edmund Fitzgerald, all is going well as they sail into the late afternoon. Unexpectedly, the barometer quickly drops and it becomes clear that the storm will hit Lake Superior. At 16:30, another freighter, the Arthur M. Anderson, departs 2 Harbors, Minnesota, just ahead of the Edmund Fitzgerald and on a parallel course. At the time of its construction, the slightly older Anderson is shorter than Fitzgerald. After a refit, it's lengthened to be slightly longer than the Fitzgerald, but notably slower. Edmund Fitzgerald soon closes the lead that the Anderson has. By midnight, the 2 ships are within range of each other and begin to communicate. Both ships are fitted with weather observation and reporting equipment used by the National Weather Service. The 2 skippers decide to hug the Canadian shore to shelter from the storm. As they track the storm, they realize it'll catch them before they reach the safety of Whitefish Bay. Being the faster ship, Edmund Fitzgerald passes the Anderson, but both ships are within radio and radar range, and so they speak regularly about the deteriorating weather. The wind has picked up to 40 knots and waves are easily 10 to 12 feet in height. The captain of the Anderson, Bernie Cooper, contacts the Fitzgerald and shares his prediction that once the storm progresses, the wind will likely shift by 180 degrees. As day breaks, the ships approach the islands outside of Whitefish Bay. By 1400, the ships have passed through the eye of the storm, and as predicted, the wind shifts from southerly to northerly, blowing at a strong 42 knots. Snow begins to fall heavily on the lake. The Anderson loses sight of the Fitzgerald. As conditions worsen, they can only see each other on radar. Right here, the story starts to take diverging courses. These scenarios could be viewed in isolation or in combination with one another. Everyone knows the story and has an opinion, and each is valid. My best guess is that the exact cause of the sinking is not one, but a combination of causes. But which combination? At 1500, the Anderson's Captain Cooper brings the ship further to the east to avoid the 6-fathom shoal. Captain McSorley on the Fitzgerald doesn't follow the Anderson into deeper water. Under normal conditions, the 6-fathom shoal is about 36 feet deep. The loaded draft of the Anderson is around 26 feet. The draft of a ship is the depth of the keel below the waterline. The Fitzgerald's draft is 25 feet under normal load. It's always a good idea to avoid shallow shoals, particularly in bad weather. If the Fitzgerald hits the shoal, it could damage the integrity of the ship. In combination with a heavy load and bad weather, they could potentially break apart. At 1530, Captain McSorley on the Fitzgerald radios the Anderson and says that they've lost a railing on the deck as well as a few vent covers. They're taking on water. This looks to me like the fourth theory to explain the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. McSorley says he's reducing speed so that the Anderson can catch up. Captain Cooper acknowledges, then asks if the pumps are on, and Captain McSorley confirms they're both running. The Anderson is now 17 nautical miles behind the Fitzgerald. Both ships are about 4 or 5 hours from the safety of Whitefish Bay. Between 1530 and 1620, Captain Cooper watches his radar as the Fitzgerald sails further towards the 6-fathom shoal, then passes directly over it. 6-fathom shoal is well known by local skippers, but the depths are not very well documented on the chart. In fact, there are discrepancies between Canadian and American charts at the time. It's possible the Fitzgerald scrapes its hull on the shoal, and in the heavy weather, a wave hits the ship at the same time, disguising the contact with the shoal. This is theory number 5 for the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. At 1620, less than an hour after their last contact, the Anderson receives another call from the Fitzgerald. Captain McSorley says that both his radars aren't working and he's driving blind. He asks Captain Cooper if he can assist in navigating using the Anderson's radar. Captain McSorley doesn't mention to the Anderson that they ran aground or scraped the shoal, and he continues to sail the ship into deeper water after passing over the shoal. During the investigation after the Fitzgerald sinks, many engineers and experts are interviewed. All the expert witnesses agreed that the Fitzgerald would have sunk quickly if it had made contact with the shoal. None of the experts at the time thought the ship would have been able to continue sailing as far as it did. I've been on a boat navigating sandbanks, and we made light contact with the ground. I know it's a different scale, but when we made contact, I could feel the shudder and a distinct drop in momentum as it made contact. I would think an experienced captain like McSorley would also notice and report if he'd made contact with the shoal. There are several forums that refer to divers who found red paint on the shoal, but no matter how hard I searched for an original quote, I could only find comments in forums and not an original article about that claim. I did find articles about the official search of the shoals that found no evidence of grounding on the shoal. By 1630, it's getting dark, and along with the snow, visibility might as well be zero. The winds are 58 knots from the north. At 1700, Captain Cooper on the Anderson radios to say they're 15 nautical miles astern of the Edmund Fitzgerald. It's taken 1.5 hours to close 2 nautical miles. They're still assisting with navigation using their radar as they slowly close the distance. At 1720, Captain McSorley calls the Coast Guard station at Grand Marais, Michigan. He's trying to get a fix off the beacon at Whitefish Point, but isn't picking up the signal. Without his radar and with such low visibility, this is one of his only ways of navigating. A Great Lakes registered pilot is on board the Swedish vessel Avafors heading north from Whitefish Point. He replies to the Fitzgerald to say that Whitefish Point Light is operating, but the radio beacon is not working. The Fitzgerald is navigating with very little information. The radio channel remains open for a moment, and the pilot aboard Avafors overhears the Fitzgerald master say to the crew, "Don't allow nobody on deck," followed by some conversation about a vent, which isn't clear. The Fitzgerald's master then tells the Avafors that the Fitzgerald has a bad list, has lost both radars, and is taking heavy seas over the deck in one of the worst seas he's ever encountered. The list confirms that the Fitzgerald has already taken on water. It could be that the keel has separated and the faulty welds are letting water in from below the waterline. Perhaps the deck hatches aren't secure and water has found its way into the cargo hatches, which are possibly carrying more load than is safe in these conditions. The damaged vent cover could have let in enough water to make the ship list. Or maybe the Fitzgerald has run aground and torn a hole in its hull, allowing water to seep in. Now we come to the sixth theory of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. The seas are growing with 25-foot waves crashing over the decks of both the Anderson and the Fitzgerald. A phenomenon known as the Three Sisters is reported near the locations of Edmund Fitzgerald and the Arthur Anderson. A series of at least 2, possibly 3 larger than normal rogue waves hits the 2 ships. Captain Cooper on the Anderson records 2 waves that are around 30 to 35 feet at 1900. He notes in his ship's log that the wave action has caused damage to the deck gear on his ship. It's possible that the first wave floods the deck of the Fitzgerald with a large amount of water. If it's not completely drained before the second wave hits, it could drive the bow under. Or it's possible that the Fitzgerald rides high, straddles either 1 or 2 waves, and flexes mid-ship, splitting the ship and causing it to sink quickly. At 1900, the Fitzgerald is only about an hour from the safety of Whitefish Bay. The first mate on the Anderson calls Captain McSorley to inform him that the Fitzgerald is approximately 10 nautical miles ahead and about 15 nautical miles from Whitefish Bay. 10 minutes later, at 1910, the Anderson picks up a contact on its radar further to the south. He calls McSorley and says there is a target 9 miles ahead. A target on radar is another vessel. McSorley asks if he's going to clear, to which the mate responds, yes, he's going to pass to the west of you. The Fitzgerald responds with a simple, well, fine. The mate then asks, how are you holding out with your problems? And McSorley says, we are holding our own. There are 2 areas of high wind over Lake Superior with speeds exceeding 43 and 40 knots. The southeastern part of the lake, where the Fitzgerald is, experiences the highest winds. The waves are nearly 20 feet high with winds over 50 miles per hour. The Edmund Fitzgerald is on the eastern edge of the high wind area. Captain Cooper on the Anderson records northwest winds of 57 miles per hour with gusts up to 86 miles per hour. Conditions are treacherous. Then the snow subsides and visibility opens up significantly. The crew on the Anderson searches for the lights of the Fitzgerald but can't see them. Captain Cooper worries that the Fitzgerald has lost power and tells his crew to look for a silhouette. At 1920, only 10 minutes after their last radio call, the Anderson's radar is picking up 3 targets, but not the Edmund Fitzgerald. Captain Cooper calls the Fitzgerald over the radio with no response. He calls again. Soon after, he calls the Coast Guard station to report his loss of radio contact with the Fitzgerald. An hour later, at 20:32, Cooper calls the Coast Guard again, saying he is very concerned about the safety of the Fitzgerald. At 2100, almost 2 hours after their last contact, the Anderson officially declares the Fitzgerald missing. The Coast Guard initiates a search. They contact Rescue Coordination Center Cleveland, Ohio, who dispatches a search and rescue aircraft from Traverse City. Then they ask ships in the area to look for the Fitzgerald. More than one ship is asked to alter course or double back to search the last known location of the Fitzgerald. But they decline because of the risk to their ship and crew, which is their first priority. The Coast Guard don't immediately dispatch a search and rescue boat because of the high winds and rough seas. They ask Captain Cooper on the Anderson to come about and conduct a search. Captain Cooper is hesitant. He's concerned that the Fitzgerald has been lost to the storm his crew have just survived. After some convincing, he reluctantly agrees and turns the Anderson around to sail back into the storm to search for the Fitzgerald. Night turns to day. At 0800 the next morning, the Anderson spots a piece of lifeboat, then another. Aircraft and rescue vessels join to search a vast area, but none of the 29 crew members are found, dead or alive. They find pieces of life jackets, oars, a lifeboat, air tanks, and a heaving line, but no personal effects and no bodies. The damage to the lifeboats indicates they were wrenched from the ship. They weren't launched. A few days later, on the 14th of November, a side scan sonar identifies two large objects on the bottom of Lake Superior. They scan it several times but can't determine if it's the Fitzgerald. The search is called off. In May of the following year, the Navy brings out their Curve 3 underwater ROV equipped with an underwater camera. They get visual confirmation that the wreck is in fact the Edmund Fitzgerald. Sitting at the bottom in 530 feet of water, it's split into two sections, with an enormous debris field spread out between the two sections. They don't find any bodies. Based on the Curve 3 survey, the National Transportation Safety Board notes damage and missing components across different hatch covers, including signs of external pressure fractures. This looks like wave action could potentially have caved in a hatch. It wasn't until 1994 that the body of a crew member was discovered near the bow in the ship. Unfortunately, the body was not identifiable. After an accident like this, each group of people would like to assign blame to someone else. The insurance company would like to assign blame to the ship's owners so that they can reduce the amount they pay out. The ship's owners would like to avoid blame for poor maintenance or endorsing overloading so that the insurance company pays in full. The families of the sailors don't want to see their loved ones take the blame for something like not fastening deck hatches. And the Coast Guard don't want to be criticized for not sending ships out to search immediately or possibly missing the opportunity to insist on more thorough welding during maintenance inspections. But one thing is certain. The weather played the most significant role. If you remove the weather from the equation, it's unlikely the Fitzgerald would have sank on this voyage. But the rough sea and large waves combined forces with one or more contributing factors. In 2005, the Ontario Heritage Act declared the site a burial ground, which means nobody can go back and dive there to gather more information about the wreck. 6 Fathoms Shoal was later found to be 1 mile further north than the American charts in circulation at the time. The Arthur M. Anderson is still in service today. Which do you believe is to blame? A heavy load, structural weakness, vent covers or deck hatches that allowed water in, grounding on an uncharted shoal, or braking over large waves? Let me know in the comments. Thanks again to MyHeritage for sponsoring this video. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen right now to start your 30-day free trial and use my code WaterlineStories for free shipping.